Welcome to our Financial Literacy Education series. My name is Corin Jacker from Priority One Wealth Management Group. During this series, we're going to cover a range of topics to help you better understand your money, to help you become more engaged with your money and understand why it's going to be important for your future. In today's episode, we're going to look at why we even need to know about our money. So, why do we need to invest? The main reason that we hear about is that we're an ageing population. So what that means is we've got more people retiring, so they're leaving the workforce, which means less taxes being paid while they're working, and also they start draining money out of the government through age pension and other payments. That's going to put a lot of cost pressure on society. So the government is trying to encourage everyone to be more self-funded in their retirement. And they're going to do that by removing entitlements, so making the age pension harder to get. And they're also doing it by providing incentives, so you can hopefully save more for your own retirement. Another reason is probably less well understood is what we call the rising cost of participation in society. Most of us are pretty familiar with the rising cost of living, which tracks inflation, so the rising cost of goods and services. So we understand that we're going to need more income to pay for the same things over time. The cost of participating in society, though, is a reflection of how society changes over someone's retirement, which could be 20, 30 years. So by an example, if you're in the 60s and you're retiring, you've got a small house, you perhaps have one car. At that time, luxuries could have been things like a television, a telephone, and overseas travel was probably almost unheard of. And even going to restaurants was very unknown. Flip forward to the 80s, and someone looking at retiring then, they've got a bigger car, a bigger house, and perhaps two cars. They've got more than one television. They've got VCRs, they've got microwaves, they've got telephones. And things like overseas travel is becoming more common. So what's starting to shift is that what was once a luxury starts to become normal and then a necessity. So if you look at the society now, and if you're retiring today, compared to what it would have been in the 80s or 90s, things like overseas travel is almost an expectation, no longer a luxury. So we need to not only understand and have the money to participate in what society looks like today, but we need to have the money to be able to continue to participate in what society might look like. So some of the things that are considered luxuries today might become normal and then become necessities. So an example could be around health, where the new technology today is looking at things, how they can better transplant joints. So if you're getting a knee operation today, it might be through one method, but in years to come, it could be a completely different artificial knee where they replace the whole thing. Now that's going to cost money, so we're going to have money to not only fund what we want to today, but for the rest of our retirement. On a more personal note, I think it's important to understand what money means to us and what we call the value of money. So we can look at that by answering a simple question about what's important about money to you. Now, if I ask that question of someone, the answer could be something like, well, it gives me security, such as putting a roof over our heads, clothing and food. Then you ask yourself the question, what's important about that security to you? And someone might answer, well, it gives me more time with the family once we've got that security. What's important about having more time with your family? And someone might say, well, it gives my life more balance and a sense of accomplishment. What's important about that to you? Well, it might mean that I can be the best that I can be and my life has purpose. So you can see it's almost like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where our values for money initially cover off what's really important: security, housing, clothing, food. And then we move a little bit more to family and friends and loved ones. And then it becomes almost a self-actualization exercise where we actually get fulfillment for the things that we do. Which brings me to the next question I often get asked, which is, does money buy happiness? And there's been lots of research to show that it doesn't buy happiness, and then recent research shows that maybe it does. And I think it depends. Certainly having enough money to give us what we need is important. And then having enough money simply allows us to have more choices and opportunity. So if we want to look at what potentially can make us happier when we use our money, in my experience, if people spend money on material goods, so if you think you're going to go out and buy a new car, a new phone, a bigger TV, a bigger house, often those things don't create a higher level of happiness. And in fact, much of those things, depending on how they're financed, can lead to higher levels of stress. And recent studies have shown that somewhere between a quarter and a third of most adults in Australia at some stage suffer from higher levels of stress, anxiety or depression. And for almost half of those participants, the number one reason of that stress and anxiety and depression was around finances. So a lot of people are putting a lot of pressure on themselves to try and give them things or give family things that they think is important, but is often not. In my experience, if you spend your money on experiences, and if you spend your money on helping out others, those things give you a lot greater sense of happiness. So things like travel, things like spending time with family, things like further education and gaining knowledge. Those things often lead to a greater level of happiness. So I think once we understand what our values around money are, and if we know what leads to higher levels of happiness and how we use our money, we can start to make better choices about what we do with it. And that leads us to then defining some goals. So if we make some really good goals about what we want to achieve with our money, then we can start to understand our money. We become a lot more engaged with it. Ultimately, what we're looking for is what we call a point of financial independence. And what that simply means is you get to a point where if you stop work today, you've got enough money to do what you want to do for the rest of your life. So most of us, when we leave school and education, we might rent a place, so we need to pay rent. So all of a sudden we're having to work to pay the bills. Then we might buy a home, so we've got a mortgage to pay off. We might have a family, so we've got kids to bring up. So most of us spend a number of decades working because we have to, not because we want to, because we've taken on commitments which we must meet. But hopefully we get to a point, if we're smart with our money and make better decisions about our money, we get to a point where if we stop work, we've got enough money to do what we want to do. And that's what we call a point of financial independence. Because it doesn't mean you stop work, it just means you've got choice. So many people will get to that point, they may not stop work, they may change the job they're in, the industry or the career they're in. They may change the hours they work. But all that is choice. And the sooner you get to the point of financial independence, the sooner you have those choices. In the rest of our series, we'll cover all the other areas of making better decisions about your money. Goodbye.